This is straight from our mixed methods methodology group. We're about to welcome a presentation on data transformation in mixed methods systematic reviews and a starting point. And we have three speakers with us today, the conveners and indeed the chair of the mixed methodology group. So this is all a bit out of order, but I'd like to initially, our speakers are Dr. Cindy Stern. Cindy, can you raise your hand? I know she's just over here, who is a Deputy Editor-in-Chief of JBI Evidence Synthesis and a very close colleague of mine, which certainly does publish reviews that follow the methodology and methods developed by JBI, as do many other journals around the world, and co-convener of the group. Dr. Lucylynn Lizarondo is just down here. She'll be joining us in a moment after Heather, who is a research fellow in the implementation science team at JBI, and just spreading her wings around the model into a bit of synthesis, which is nice to see, and also co-convener of the group. And finally, and it seems also firstly, I'd like to introduce Professor Heather Loveday from the University of West London, who is the Director of the Richard Wells Research Centre and indeed Chair of the JBI Mixed Method Methodology Group. So please join me in welcoming Heather to kick proceedings off. Please,
thank you very much, Ed. Take this. So myself and colleagues, as you've heard, are going to introduce you to a piece of work we've been doing for about the last 12 months, hoping to finish it within this calendar year so that we can then move on to what looks like a really exciting programme of work next year. So in the presentation, we're actually just going to give you a little bit of background to mixed methods systematic reviews and how data transformation actually happens in those. Then Cindy and Lucylynn are actually going to talk about the work we've been doing to show you what the aims, methods and findings are, what our proposed approach is, but also what we then want from you is some feedback around how you think about the approaches that we're actually going to present you with. So these are our conflicts of interest. And this is the Mixed Methods Group. We've been in existence since around 2011-12, I think, and we have the instigator of the Mixed Methods Group in the room, in Professor Alan Pearson, who's sitting to my left. Original members of the group were Judith Carrier, Christina Godfrey, Sue Salmon, Joe Apostolo, and Pam Kirkpatrick, and then the rest of us have come on board slightly later and have been working on this latest packet of work. I want to take the opportunity just quickly to thank Lucylynn and Cindy, because without them, we actually wouldn't progress our work as quickly as we have. They are stalwarts and hugely, hugely productive. So thank you, Cindy and Lucy. Like Jennifer, I'm just going to put a call out. We are going to ask for some new members in the new year, so just keep your eye out for those applications. So, mixed methods systematic reviews, what are they and why do we do them? So they're reviews that contain quantitative and qualitative and mixed methods studies. They follow the same steps as any other review. We have robust measures for actually doing them, but they do have distinct methods in the synthesis process and the integration of the data in order to give us an outcome, if you like, in terms of the review. They can allow a broader and deeper understanding of the phenomena of interest that we're actually looking at, rather than doing two different reviews and never actually thinking about how those outcomes might come together. So I just want to ask, has anyone in the room done a mixed methods review? If you could raise your hands. Okay, there's a few. Are any of you thinking about doing a mixed methods review? Any thinkers out there who might be going to do one? Okay. And how many of you thought about it and thought, oh no, that's not for me? Yeah, okay. That was just a snapshot. Cindy? Okay. So we currently have guidance for two types of mixed methods review. The convergent segregated approach and the convergent integrated approach. And the approach that you take is actually defined by your question. That's great for us methodologists, isn't it, and teachers, where we say the question is the be-all and end-all of what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. So we start with a question and try and decide what's the approach that we actually need to take. So this is in the chapter, and it's a really nice, flow diagram of how you go about the type of review that you want to do. So depending on what your review question is, you choose either the left-hand or the right-hand column. In the left-hand column, you basically have one question. If you have one question, then what you're actually going to take is an integrated approach. If you have two questions, then you're going to undertake the segregated approach. Now, one of the things that we've actually found is that if in the segregated approach, you basically do a quantitative element, a qualitative element, and then you bring the two elements together, but you don't integrate them. In the integrated approach, you actually turn quantitative data into qualitative data, what we call qualitizing. And so the JBI approach is to qualitize quantitative data. And what we found in some of our reading and the reviews is actually reviewers have quite a lot of difficulty, or they choose different approaches to how they qualitize quantitative data. So what we've tried to look at is how do you transform data and when do you do it? So that's been the topic of what we've actually done in the last 12 months. So, Lucylynn, would you like to come and take over? This is the complicated bit, so I get to sit down.
So in 2020, our group released its updated guidance, and since then it has become quite a popular methodology. And to date, I think there are close to about 300 systematic reviews that have cited the JBI convergent integrated approach. And because of its wider adoption, we regularly review our guidance, and we also collect feedback from users. And one of the most common comments we receive from users is the challenge associated with transformation, and that's why we did the work that we are presenting today. And basically we wanted to know, and we wanted to describe what data transformation is. When does it happen in systematic reviews of mixed method systematic reviews? And how do you actually undertake data transformation, which is specific to the qualitization method, not the quantitization? So what we've done first is to actually look at the literature to check what's been out there about data transformation. And what we found was that most of the literature around data transformation is actually focused on primary mixed methods. And there was really almost nothing for systematic reviews. So we were quite disappointed with that. And so what we've done next is to actually review some of the, or a subset of the systematic reviews that have claimed to have cited the JBI approach to convergent integrated. And what we've done is to look at how they describe their data transformation methods and check whether they have examples of their qualitized statements in their systematic review. And where there were examples, we actually retrieved the primary quantitative studies that they've included in their review. So based on the learnings we had from the systematic reviews that we've examined, two members of the methodology group wrote a discussion paper as a start and then circulated that to the wider methodology group. We have a series of online discussions and debates, and that's also supplemented by regular emails. And so we're now presenting to you what we've come up with. So what we found is that there is a lot of variability in the way reviewers perform data transformation. In fact, we were able to identify three main approaches that reviewers do to transform their data. And I'm going to present you the examples of these reviews and then illustrate what those three approaches look like. So the first one here, you could see in the first column, the systematic review we've examined, their objective. In the middle column is the data that we've extracted from the primary study that they've actually included in their review. And then in the third column is the qualitized statement that they presented in their review. What do you notice? So they're the same, right? So there's really no qualitization that took place, which means their qualitized statements include the numerical results as well as the narrative representation of the narrative results. And what they've actually done is use those qualitized statements alongside the qualitative data from the qualitative studies, coded them, and then grouped them into sub-themes and further into themes. So that's one approach. This is a second approach that we found. In this approach, so again, look at the review objective in the right-hand side of the column. Middle column is what we've extracted from the primary quantitative studies, and then in the third column are the qualitized data that were presented in the systematic review. Now, in the first example at the top, you see their numerical results as well. In fact, what they've done is actually, instead of spelling out the 41, they did like a numeric result. And then, so it's they've tweaked the quantitative data from the primary study and then included 2 months in their qualitized statement to align it better with the systematic review objective. In the second example, what the reviewers have done was to actually rephrase the data from the primary quantitative studies and make it clearer and more in line with the objective of the systematic review. So as with the first approach, there seems to be no qualitization that occurred. And what they've done is actually use those qualitized data and then code them alongside the qualitative data from the qualitative studies that they've included, group them into sub-themes, and then further collapse into themes. The third approach is, again, I have 2 examples for the third approach. So what these reviewers have done is to actually extract data from the quantitative studies, and then data transformation or qualitization is an additional step, where in these examples, they use text descriptors like majority because it was 94%. And then the other example here, because it was 54.6%, they said more than half. So if you compare these to the first 2 approaches, there are no numeric results in their qualitized statements. So again, what happened was they extracted from the primary quantitative study and then qualitized the numerical results by using text descriptors like majority or more than half. In this other example, they did the same thing. They extracted the data from the quantitative studies and then used some form of labels or codes to qualitize the results from the quantitative studies. So you could see in these examples the codes that they've used to qualitize the quantitative results from the quantitative studies. So what we've found really is that there is some reviewers, what they would do is actually extract verbatim data from the primary quantitative studies or tweak them a little bit, reward them to align with the systematic review objective, but the qualitization appears to be implicit as data extraction occurs. Whereas other reviews would extract data first from the quantitative studies. Data transformation is then an additional step, or the qualitization is an additional step before integration occurs. So those are what we found from the existing systematic reviews that have cited the JBI methodology for convergent integrated approach. So based on those learnings, we are now proposing an approach for data transformation.
Okay, so Lucy's just shown you that when we looked to the reviews that had followed our guidance, there was a mix of different approaches being used, and it was clear that our guidance needed some clarity. So we went back as a group, like Heather said, and we've been discussing this on and off for, I think, a year. So we're going to go through what we've proposed now, but the complete caveat is this is not official JBI guidance. We have not submitted it to the scientific committee yet. We actually want feedback from you. Please be nice. I'm looking at you, Zach Munn, with a big smile on his face. So yes, we are looking for some feedback, but I guess the way that we've framed this guidance, and we felt we needed to frame it, was to talk about data extraction and talk about data integration separately. So they are two different steps in the process. So if you are conducting a JBI mixed methods convergent integrated review, and you're up to extraction and you're extracting quantitative data, whether that be from quantitative studies or primary mixed method studies, where possible, we are encouraging or recommending authors that they should stay as close as possible to the data reported in the primary studies. So where you've got the numeric results that have a narrative representation, we are hoping, or we are wanting reviewers to extract that information verbatim. So if we look back to Lucy's tables, that's that first example, verbatim extraction. We understand that dependent on the needs of your review, this is not always going to meet the needs of your review. So there might be insufficient information. So in that particular scenario, we would want reviewers to extract the verbatim data, but then supplement it with the information you need. So if we go back to Lucy's table, there was that example with the time parameter. So it will depend on your review. It might be different types of contextual information, comparator information, information related to statistical significance. But I guess the highlight here is we're not wanting reviewers to develop fresh narratives. They're using the data from the primary studies and then they're supplementing if they need. Now, we also had a bit of a discussion about this because there is going to be situations where there actually is no narrative provided in the primary studies. So if you think about these types of systematic reviews, often they're asking questions of barriers and enablers or factors or determinants, and they measure a lot of factors and determinants. It may be that they actually only report in the narrative those that are statistically significant, but you've got all of these factors listed in tables and figures, but there's no narrative. So in those circumstances, we are recommending that reviewers will obviously have to create their own narrative, but we would want them to base it on the style and format of the key data that was described in the primary studies. So we've got three approaches here. We've got that verbatim extraction with some supplementation, but from the primary study, or when there's no narrative, the reviewers are developing it, but they're basing it on the style and the format of those primary studies. So when we're thinking about planning our review and conducting our review, we need to start thinking about, well, what approach are we going to take? Now, essentially, you aren't going to know what approach you're going to take until you come up to the extraction stage. So it may be that in one study you can do complete extractions verbatim, but there might be other studies where you have to do a mixture. So in terms of your planning and your reporting within your review, we are suggesting that in the protocol you would outline all of those 3 approaches, what you might do, but when you actually get up to your review, you would actually comment on what approaches you use. So you outline all the approaches in your protocol, but the ones you actually used, you would put in your review, noting that we expect that it will be variable across included studies. Now, in terms of extraction, we also want to consider the following, which, again, when we were looking at our reviews, we didn't always see this data within the reviews themselves. So what data will be extracted? So if we're talking about reviews of factors, what constitutes a factor? What constitutes a barrier or a facilitator? We want to see that detailed in the protocol. As I've just gone through, we'd like to see or outline what approaches will be planned to use to extract and what were actually used. And then we need to consider this issue of cutoffs. So some reviewers like to use cutoffs. I guess the most popular one that we saw is that they'll only include factors that were found to be statistically significant. So if you are, as a reviewer, planning to conduct or to include a cutoff, we would want to see that documented in the protocol, and as well as that, a rationale for doing so. If you are to use a cutoff, it may be that you include primary studies, but there's data from that primary study that won't actually go out to be included in your results. So we would like the authors or reviewers to consider some discussion on that, about excluding potential results from the review. And then also on that, if we do have a cutoff, it may impact, or it will impact, the results of the review. So we're encouraging reviewers to have some discussion about that in their review, perhaps as a limitation as well. So I think, looking around the room, I don't have to go into these points in too much detail, but I guess we just want to highlight that when we're talking about data extraction, and I guess particularly for mixed methods, or no, for all types of reviews, but the importance of cross-checking your data. So we've all seen examples of primary studies or systematic reviews where in the data in the figures and tables don't actually match the narrative within the actual paper. So we need to think about mechanisms to ensure and cross-check that the numerical data does align with the narrative. We obviously want experienced reviewers to be helping out within the systematic review and data extraction, and I guess in this particular circumstance, we want people with quantitative research backgrounds. We strongly recommend piloting using a standardised form, so we're ensuring that all extraction happens, or we're all doing the same thing. And like international consensus, we want extraction to be taken in duplicate and independent. Now, when we're talking about piloting, we want to use a standardised data extraction form. And if you currently look in our chapter, we do have an extraction form, but based on the work that we've been doing, we have updated it, and it comes from this work and also a bit of a piece of work we did last year, I think it was, where we looked at other examples of reviews that had followed our guidance, and there was this lack of transparency in terms of what was extracted from the primary studies, what was fresh narratives. So with this revised extraction form, it is clear per study what data was extracted verbatim, what had modifications, and what was fresh narrative. So that's the data extraction phase. Now we see this transformation phase happening as part of integration. So just to reiterate what Heather said, you can qualitise and you can quantitise. The JBI approach is to qualitise, and we see that happening after data extraction, and that's what forms that integration process. So within our group, we have had a lot of discussion about what qualitisation means, and I'm sure it means different things to different people in this room. But where we have landed on at the moment is that it involves that grouping of data in order to form categories and integrated findings. So it's kind of transforming or moving that data into something else. So the approach we take to integration, we complement the JBI approach to qualitative synthesis, where we assemble all of our results and findings together, and then we look for that similarity in meaning, where we can create categories and ideally integrated findings. So this is an example of a flowchart that we've got in our manual, but this has been updated. So it's working from left to right, and you can see alongside the left we've got our data, and that's going to be our qualitative data or our quantitative data. And when I'm talking about quantitative data, we're talking about the numeric results with the narrative representation. So we're looking for those similarities in meaning with the ideal to form categories and then integrated findings. And you can see here that a category might consist of purely qualitative data, purely quantitative data, or a combination of both. So this is where we're at. As I said, we are looking for feedback from this group. We are planning to pilot this. We have a member of our group whose PhD student is currently at extraction, so we're going to see how that all works. As I said, we plan to submit this to the JBI Scientific Committee and update our chapter, but we see this leading into a few pieces of work, but the next piece will be on integration, and we need to start thinking about how we might assess certainty and confidence in the result in these reviews, because there hasn't been a lot of work done in that area, is our understanding, and we need to think about that from a JBI standpoint. So, comments and questions?
Thank you, Heather and Cindy and Lucy. I'll let you hold on to that. You can pass that microphone around. Thank you for that interesting presentation. I did note the observation that when Heather asked who'd done a mixed method systematic review, quite a few hands went up, and who was thinking, those hands all went straight down pretty quickly. Very complex. I have a quick question for you. Thinking about the other alternative approach for the different question, we synthesise the numerical data, the quantitative data, we synthesise the qualitative data, and then there's that juxtaposition. Here, it looks like we're extracting and integrating. An opportunity for synthesis of the quantitative data is no longer there. And I see qualitised on one arm of this synthesis. And that's come down to words and I saw proportions up there. It might be one study. We're talking similar population, similar PICO here. And it's going to come down to a synthesis of that data that's been put in. So it might be 60% in one, 20% in another. Have you got 40% instantly in your head? Is there opportunity for synthesis there, or is that something we're not considering before it enters that qualitisation zone?
So again, just to clarify, Ed, so we've spoken about qualitization. We're not there yet in the integration. We're just...
Sorry, I'm listening.
So what we've highlighted here is that when you integrate, you don't necessarily have to remove those numerical results. And that's probably in recognition of what you've always asked us anyway about significant findings, and some reviewers would even exclude the non-significant ones. And how do you actually determine which ones you include in the integration? So I think it's better reporting now in terms of when you include quantitative data from the primary studies, we actually are not asking them to remove the numeric results. What we found is that even though you have numerical results there, you can actually integrate them and group them with the qualitative data. At the moment, how that happens is when you see patterns or similarities in meanings, you group them together. but the quantitative results are still there.
Yes, I appreciate that. It was just whether that you're using a synthesised estimate, which would ideally help you with that grouping, I guess, across the lot. But thank you. There's some food for thought there. I don't want to monopolise things. Deborah, you have a question from the back.
Yeah, it was about the use of cutoffs. It just really concerns me that if you've got two studies and they say it's a facilitator, but in another two studies it's not been effective, then you're cherry picking positive results.
We totally agree, Deborah, and we had discussion about that. We've kept it open, but I guess our preference would be that there would be no cutoffs, but we are aware that reviewers are doing that, so we've kind of left it a bit broad, but we are on the same page and we would recommend keeping it open.
And that, not only that, like most of the time in reviews like this, there are primary quantitative studies that only present their results using descriptive statistics, like percentages only. So what would happen with that? Other studies that they include would test for significance, whereas potentially some of the other included studies would only have descriptive statistics in them. So there is that danger of only setting a cutoff, because what happens to those studies that only use descriptive statistics when they present their results?
And just following on from that thought, is that in some studies it might be the nuances of a particular way that they've done it, what works for who in what situation. So if you don't include everything, you're losing that level of information. So I would like to see JB be more prescriptive and put their stamp down and say no cutoffs.
Maybe we need to be a bit harsher, yeah.
But this is complex stuff. It bends the mind when you start thinking about it and how to all put it down on paper. And on that score of putting it down on paper, have the group got a nice broad project that is bending your mind for some examples for our manual, which always can, I mean, we see the example from the reporting guidelines where there are examples of how to best report. Do we have one coming? A stunning example of a mixed methods convergent?
Well, as I alluded to, we have a member's PhD student. I think she's currently at extraction, is she? So we're hoping that that might be a good example that we can use, yeah.
Fantastic, something to look forward to. Please join me in thanking our presenters, Heather, Cindy and Lucy. Thank you so much.